don't know why that was so funny, but it was funny.
I don't give a shit.
Welcome in. It is live before lock. I didn't hear any music. Maybe that was on my end here, but this is what I look forward to. Jordan, man, your beats, just getting ready. A nice conversation to cook up with Terry. The chat here as well, and maybe it was just on my end. I think it was because maybe some weird setting, but that sets the tone, Terry. If I don't get some sort of beat coming in, then is it all worth it, my friend?
Yeah, that's it wasn't coming through on this end either, and I wasn't looking at anything. I didn't see Jordan doing the little 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in the window or any of that. So I was so shocked that we were on the air all of a sudden. But good to be here with you, buddy, on a Sunday morning. Interesting day of baseball to talk about. Surprise day off for me from playing DFS because FanDuel decided to change their start time to 12:10.
Right.
So that was fun. So we're going to talk a lot of DK today.
Yeah, and let's jump in on that in the sense of not talk a lot of DK right away, but kind of explain what the hell happened, because you and I were trying to figure this thing out. Well, you were trying to let me clarify. You were trying to explain to me what happened, and I either couldn't or was resisting in some weird way. But yeah, everything got screwed up, and FanDuel jumped in and said, all right, well, we're going to screw everybody over. DraftKings at least zeroed out, so you have some opportunity to get around that. But basically, the doubleheader initially, the first leg, was one we were going to talk about, and now it is not. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, that game is. FanDuel, you've already passed lock. So if you haven't edited your FanDuel lineups, if you didn't put them in, too bad. You're out of luck. See you tomorrow. Yep. You can still, of course, edit all the other games. That's kind of how I was looking at it. I was like, I can drop 150 placeholders in there now, zero out that early game, and then just play the other games that start 1:35 and after and edit my lineups during the show. But that just sounded messy to do while doing a show. But people out there, if you've got placeholders in that don't include players in that game, you can still edit those spots, of course. But yeah, we're going to be hyper-focused on DK stuff today because the FanDuel slate already started. That game is confirmed, will score zeros. Any player from either game, regardless of how you get there on DK today in the main slate, is going to score a 0 from that Cincinnati-Colorado game. Somebody in our Discord even wrote to DK to confirm that. So
okay, good.
Yep.
I love that. Somebody in our greater community making sure and then responding back.
Yep. Wouldn't trust the note that they put on the site, which, hey, stupid things happen. So I'm glad we got the extra confirmation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, I'm glad and you aren't the only ones that feel this way about the music that comes out from Jordan ahead of time. 243 Entertainment. Jordan got that work better than most of the music industry. Are we sure that he is the one physically creating these on an old MPC or some other archaic beat maker?
Absolutely. He's got you've never seen like the rest of his house on the camera there. He's got a couple turntables on the side, big drum kit. It's ridiculous.
I love it, man. I love it. All right. So that's the big news with this slate is we remove Colorado and Cincinnati from our existence for the next hour or so before the sucker locks. Anything else that really has jumped out or maybe taking advantage of, maybe it is with that in the backdrop, but anything else we can add to the layer, at least with this slate?
Two other games that are threatened by rain. It's gonna be an ugly one, I think. The game in Cleveland looks like the worst of those two, the Mariners Cleveland game. I think they're gonna want to try and get that in, but I'm just not sure what part of the day. It looks like light rain through most of the afternoon till 6, then heavier rain into the evening. Not good up there. The Atlanta game has a little bit of weather going on, but it looks a little bit cleaner, and it looks like they've got a window over the next few hours, so they can probably get that one started up and not worry about the rain until later in the game, is from what I'm seeing. So I'd be more confident in that one going, but definitely keep an eye on that Cleveland game as we approach lock, because that one's looking a little ugly.
Now, what mug is Larry C talking about that you allegedly stole? I didn't see you pull a mug up.
Probably this one.
And
nice. Yes, I did steal it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, like if you bought that at the Hallmark store, it would lose a little luster.
It would be really cheesy. Yeah, that's why I wouldn't buy that at the Hallmark store. I would make fun of it for being for sale at the Hallmark store.
But it's not.
And then I would encourage someone else to steal it.
Right.
I stole it from a place where I'm pretty sure they left it out wanting it to get stolen, but that was kind of the gimmick. So
yeah,
I'm going along with the gimmick to a degree for creative America. Content theft costs jobs. That's what the mug's about.
Okay, good, good. So it was left for you to
not
take.
Our content.
But isn't that ironic in its own sense? Or I guess that's probably not true, but I don't know. Well, I love the mug. Is that the first time that you've ever used it on here before, or did?
Maybe on this show. I've used it on shows before, but probably the first time that you and I have been together where I've been using it.
No, I disagree. I've been to the Hallmark store. Okay. When you have a wife and kid, you've been inside. And I would have bought that mug just to buy it if I saw something like that. Hallmark store ain't that cool, 1-2. All right. Like, we appreciate that. I understand it, but that mug is cooler than what you're going to get at the Hallmark store. I can promise you that.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. You know, maybe you're talking like a Spencer's Gifts level with that one, you know, right behind the guy makeup and the metalhead t-shirts.
Exactly right. All right, let's bounce around. We'll have a little time, I'm sure, to play as it's a little bit of a lighter slate, especially now with Colorado and Cincinnati gone from that. Look at that. Jordan just removed it. It's like it never even existed on the side there, just completely.
That's why he makes the big bucks. It's production value, man.
Well, yeah, that's why we spend so much money on him salary wise, is because it could be like a major production house could be after him to put out beats just for.
Seriously. Yeah. He's got the beats. He can work a green screen. I mean, this kid should be in Hollywood.
Look, all right, let's jump in here. So let's start with our first game, man. You mentioned the weather, and clearly this game should start. I don't know if it is going to be something that you're expecting deeper into it, or if it's even something that you're going to have factor in as far as like a slate is concerned, or pardon me, the stack is concerned. But we can at least look at the pitchers, right? Because even if you're getting 5-6 innings, that might be enough before the rain starts. We've got Fried right there at the top, and there's also a sneaky opportunity, maybe 8,200 to get to Lopez, although you're losing leverage with both of these guys.
Yeah, I like both of the pitchers in this game. On the Lopez side, you get the boost from the Braves and all their strikeouts. But you've definitely got the danger of the offensive upside. We talk about it a lot whenever anytime any reasonably good pitcher is going against them, they can always find some strikeouts against this team, but this team absolutely just mashes right-handed pitching in particular. So it's a dicey spot for Pablo. He's sitting at a 23.7% strikeout rate over the course of the season, 13% swinging strikes. He's been very good at limiting power. He's an established veteran pitcher who's been good over time at this point. So I have no issues going to the Pablo side of this thing. He's interesting at 8,200, only 17% ownership. I say only, that's probably about right, but that is probably a low price for Pablo in this situation. 9,900 on the FanDuel slate would have been an interesting spot, in my opinion, 1.3% owned. If you're editing lineups, that's one I would maybe target. I know a lot of people were maybe over the top on Carlos Carrasco from the Mets, who I'm a little concerned about the depth. I know we've got him fairly highly ranked. He projects out great for me, but this is Carrasco's first start back from the injured list after 3 weeks. He didn't throw any rehab starts. So I'm a little concerned about the depth there. And if I can make a pivot from him at 96 on that FanDuel slate, and if I've got $300 in some of those lineups that were built, I might consider that Pablo pivot at 1.3% ownership. It's a reasonable spot to move to. So I think he's interesting there. Max Fried on the other side. What can you say about this kid? He's been great all year. 22.7% strikeout rate, a 306 xFIP. He doesn't walk anybody. 4.3% walk rate, a 1.04 whip. He's great at keeping the ball in the yard. 32.8% hard hit, 3.5% barrel rate, a 1.27% home run rate. Kid is very for real, and in this matchup there's no issues here. One of the worst teams in baseball. He could absolutely go out and dominate this team. The only thing that would kill him would probably be a start and stop, where the rain comes in, stops the game excuse me, in like the fourth, and it's an extended delay, and then he doesn't come back out. That said, I think he's totally worth the price. I'd be fine, honestly, with the ownership in this matchup at 50% on DK. I don't think you're making a mistake. My approach is generally to undercut, but there's not like 15 different pitchers that I really want to spread ownership out to today on this slate either. So I think that's about appropriate in terms of the ownership.
Yeah, and just with Lopez targeting Ks there in that Braves lineup with that rate, not low enough to be a problem, his K rate.
Say that again, sorry.
With Lopez targeting the Braves lineup. his K rate is not low enough where it wouldn't be a target. Like you mentioned him being a pivot at 82.
Oh, in terms of targeting him with Braves bats.
Yep.
I'm always going to take some shots with Braves bats.
Yep.
They're good enough against basically anybody, unless we're talking about Jake DeGrom on the hill. Somebody of that caliber. And Lopez is 2-3 tiers down below DeGrom. Very good, capable pitcher, but he's not that kind of a guy. So he's a league average-ish, little above league average in terms of the strikeouts, and he's gettable. So with talent like the Braves have up and down, and with everybody in that lineup getting owned in the low single digits, Acuna the most popular player at 8.2%, everybody else below 4% or below, I can definitely take some shots there. They're firmly on that list of whenever they're low owned. I almost don't care who the opponent is. I'll take some shots, and I can do that with this team. From Acuna on down, I mean, Dansby Swanson, Austin Riley, Matt Olson, that's a killer four-man. If you want to throw Travis d'Arnaud in as a catcher at 4,100 and only 2% ownership, he's batting fifth today. 266, 319, 481, creates runs 20% better than average, a 216 ISO, 16 home runs for a catcher. At 4,100, I don't understand why he's only 2.6% owned. So he should be a little bit more popular. Harris, Vaughn Grissom, Ozuna, and Eddie Rosario down bottom. It's almost unfair, this lineup.
So just looking at where Miami is, and we don't have them. Alex does not have them up there at the top. Shocker, spoiler alert, as far as a top stack is concerned. It's 50% of the field if, in fact, Fried just doesn't have a good outing. But you kind of need both, right? Like, you need Fried to struggle, and you need Miami to take advantage of that, as opposed to just getting 2 or 3 runs as a result, I would think, for Miami to pay off. So it's almost like a parlay of circumstances, right, Terry, if that makes sense, where just Fried struggling and missing marks and allowing a hit or two doesn't mean that Miami can open up and put 7 or 8 up there, just the nature of their stack. So I don't know how big of a reward it is to take that risk to try and knock off 50% of the field.
Yeah, that's it. It's from I want to take shots against that much of the field's angle. It kind of makes sense, but we talk about it a lot. When I do that, I like to do it with at least a reasonably good team, at least a team that's somewhat capable. And I like to do it against pitchers who are, maybe very talented, justifiably popular, but can get blown up from time to time. The Robbie Rays of the world. Max Fried does not get blown up that frequently. He's very good, like I said, at keeping the ball on the ground, keeping the ball in the park, not allowing hard hit. So if anything, yeah, maybe he comes out, struggles, doesn't find a bunch of strikeouts, makes it through 5, guts his way through 5, 6, gives up 3 or 4. That's not going to get you there if you're on the Miami side. So yeah, you need both sides of those circumstances to come through. For me, it's just not there. Not seeing any home run rate. Nobody's even reaching half the magic number in my home run model for Miami. They're all super low on. They're very, very cheap. If you wanted to take shots, maybe some Charles LeBlanc, Garrett Cooper, Encarnacion. There's not much. There's really not much. Encarnacion, just because he's hitting 5th at the dead minimum 2,000. Kid's got a 46.2% hard hit over 45 plate appearances, 2 home runs in the show so far, 209 ISO. Extremely small sample, but maybe a capable bat. But it's just not a good spot.
I love it, man. Anything else I think we've pretty much covered this game here. We can move to Baltimore.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's go on. And this one, a little bit harder, right, of a pitching matchup to get to than the previous, by all means, with Adrian Martinez and Spencer Watkins. So we can just start there and see if there is any maneuverability really at all. I mean, Watkins is kind of like that bottom half, if you will. And let me refresh here. Sorry, because I was looking at the other side of it. So, I mean, really, Martinez is going to be at the bottom, and Watkins might just be a decent, cheap option as a P2. But it doesn't look like the field is looking at either one of these guys as any of them.
Yeah, and I think that's justifiable. If I was taking a side here, it would probably be the Spencer Watkins side. I have more healthy respect right now for this Orioles lineup. The A's are another team that's just one of the worst in baseball that I've been targeting all year long. That said, Spencer Watkins probably not the guy who's going to get us there. There's a few better spots on the board in terms of pitchers. It's not necessarily a slate where where I'm fully expecting 3 or 4 of these guys to go out and put up monster scores, but I think there's enough options that will put up decent scores, and his price isn't so low that it's unavoidable at 6,800 over on DK. So maybe a few shares. He's only 2% owned, but we're talking about a pitcher with a 14.7% strikeout rate over 88 2/3, a 4.70 xFIP. He's been decent at keeping the ball in the yard. I'll give him that. It's a great matchup, but that's about all I'm willing to give him. So not a great spot for him. Adrian Martinez, a little bit better with the strikeouts, but I'd just be more concerned about that Orioles lineup going against him. So no real love there. Can't wait for the Orioles to get out of the DC area. They've just these matchups between some of the worst teams in baseball have been annoying for the last week or so.
Soon, right? I would imagine.
I would imagine they're leaving today after this game.
This one,
they played the Nats and then the Orioles, and it's just been woof.
It's
not that the O's are bad anymore, but
no, exactly.
Their pitching's bad.
So with that said, though, you want to get to Baltimore's lineup here.
Yeah, I would take some shots with Orioles bats. In this situation, it's really, it's more just the ownership that you're tangling with. Cedric Mullins up top pushing nearly 20% ownership. A lot of the other guys popular, but not egregiously so, though. Everybody floating, 10%-ish or below. So I think it's very easy to string together, even if you include Mullins, Adley Rutschman, Anthony Santander, Ryan Mountcastle, Gunnar Henderson, just go 1 through 5 off the top. But Ramon Urias, Austin Hayes, Jorge Mateo down the bottom, the 6 through 8 hitters are all very, very playable in DFS, and they offset a lot of ownership. They offset a lot of cost. Mateo up to 12 home runs, 29 stolen bases. We've talked about him a lot through the season. If that kid could get on more than 27% of the time, he'd be an all-star. He'd be a very, very good player. Just can't get himself on base. He's got a 276 on base percentage. All the other numbers are there. So Mateo's interesting. Austin Hayes has some power down there. So it's a 1 through 8 lineup at least. Dual catcher with Rutschman and Chirinos in there. Kind of a wrinkle. If you need a dead minimum price catcher, Chirinos is sitting there in the 9 spot for the dead minimum in that stack. So
yeah, and real quick with Oakland, they're not totally dead, right? Where they're at the bottom, Tampa, Miami, how we kind of have a couple of these stacks just rated. There might be some decent maneuverability here, even as a cheaper sub stack, right?
Yeah, you can move around the board. It's another team that I don't love getting to, but there's a couple hitters in this lineup now who they're at least good for one-offs. And maybe some small sub stacks, like you're saying. There's a few guys that are pushing over the home run mark in my model here. That would be Sean Murphy and Seth Brown, the 2 obvious names. Yep. And then Shea Langoliers and Cody Thomas are both getting there as well. Cody Thomas, 2,000 dead minimums, hitting 7th. Kind of interesting. Sheldon Noose has been somewhat serviceable in spots, but he hasn't had a good year overall. So I don't think I would go fishing with some of those guys like the 8 hitter. You can get a little bit maybe out of Stephen Vogt in the cleanup spot. Tony Kemp, Vinma Machine up at the top of the lineup. Meh. So it's really about those power hitters in the middle of the lineup, which is why I say maybe it's more for one-offs here. Maybe you just grab that home run upside and run with it. They're drawing a little bit less ownership than the Orioles, but the key hitters that you want that I just named there outside of Cody Thomas are the guys who are getting that popularity. So it's not a great spot. It's not a spot I love, but I wouldn't tell anybody they're making a mistake by using it as a value team.
All right, let's move on then to Boston.
Yep.
I think we nailed that game. I think you did, actually. Pretty good. You got a little value, squeeze some value and conversation out of Oakland. I think you got more value out of conversation than maybe able to get from the
tee them
stack.
up. I just answer them. That's
but
it's you spotting that.
I was trying to figure out a way. You were talking about stealing that mug. I was trying to figure out a way that I could introduce some sort of stupid thievery topic. Like, what's the dumbest thing you ever stole as a kid? But, the chat's going to come in here and be like, well, I stole a car, it's something ridiculous. So I don't know if I can trust the chat.
Yeah, it's supposed to be fun. I got a good one. I don't know if you can see on the wall behind me right here below the Fear and Loathing poster.
Yeah.
That's the sanitary certificate from behind the counter at a rest stop from the Garden State Parkway.
Nice.
We stole that in high school. So one of us jumped behind, my buddy JP jumped behind the counter. I don't know why I actually ended up with it, but we used to be big on stealing signs and cones and all kinds of shit like that.
Well, okay. So was that like when the rest stop is closed, but it's still open?
Oh, no, yeah. One of those,
right.
Like the Burger King in the back is open, so you can go there. But like this was from
everything else.
Cinnabon in the front that's closed. Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
What was it from? What restaurant? Sabaros?
It's actually for all food service areas.
Okay.
Pen up at the top.
I was going to say it's a 1 in 3 shot. There's a Sabaros at one of the spots.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it was before they put Nathan's in all of them. Nathan's hot dogs, but
right. That's Garden State. You're right.
Yeah. Garden State Parkway. My dad was saying for years when I was a kid, he said these things need Nathan's hot dog stands in them, and then somebody heard him or went ahead and did it, and he missed out on a few $1 million of franchising.
Larry's asking what the statute of limitations is. I guess you'd have to look at the law and see how long the statute is for stealing what you stole. Like I could say I stole a bunch of candy from some stupid little store, right? When I was 13 years old, 12 years old. Nobody knew any better, right? That nobody's going to find me for that.
Right. Yeah. What's the monetary value on that piece of paper, really? I mean, what are we talking about?
You could probably secondary.
Okay. They probably had one faxed over the next day and we're fine, I imagine. I don't think anybody went out of business over that one. They got a parking cone over here in the other corner.
There you go.
Like big old parking cone.
No street sign? Terry's Drive or McBride Circle, something like that? Come on.
No, not in here. We had, there's another good one over here. I don't know if you can see this one.
No, you'd have to move over or bring it to us. Oh, yeah. Santa's elves say, please do not sit. Look at you, Santa. You're stealing shit from Santa's village. Have you no heart? Seriously.
No
I mean,
heart,
it's
no
one
shame.
thing. It's a victimless crime to steal that shit off the wall in the turnpike. But you're stealing the Santa's elves stuff.
I'm for an open, free Santa's workshop environment where people can sit and stand wherever they like. So I am removing these fascist rules from the mall Santa village. One
more here because I know this. Jordan's, we got to get Terry on Hoarders. All right, here's the thing. You definitely, we're going to get to Boston in 1 second, but here's the thing. You definitely have at least one, if not 10 old Blockbuster DVD or video cases that they went defunct before you returned, right?
Blockbuster, Redbox, my old National West Coast Video where I used to work back in the day. Yeah, we've got boxes of all of them. I finally threw away my VHS tapes a few years ago, like 8 or 9 years ago when I moved to this place from my old place. And I had so many old screeners. The movie companies used to send like 2 months before the movies would come out on video, they would send copies to my boss so he could decide how many copies I want to order for the store, et cetera, and he would let us take them. So I had so many of those things. Just loaded up with bootleg content over here. I'm sure there's a Blockbuster video case in this pile.
I love it. All right, let's look at this might be a pretty easy one here. I'm not sure you're spending the $7K on Dane Dunning or Josh Winkowski on this slate. So you might as well just get the pitchers out of the way here, right? There's a method to the madness. It's not like Terry's about to spend 25 minutes speaking about Josh Winkowski. So we'll spend a couple of minutes talking about other shit to fill the gap.
Obviously, you're unfamiliar with my enthusiasm and love for Dane Dunning, but...
Well, yeah, Dunning, a different story. Winkowski, I figured you'd breeze through.
And Dunning definitely not warranting the 20-minute version of this speech. I will say at 7,000, only 2.4% ownership, you might be able to squeeze a little juice out of him. He's a good young pitcher. He's just not a big-time strikeout guy, and he's putting a few too many guys on base this year. 9.1% walks, 1.40 whip against a reasonably talented team like the Red Sox here. I don't totally love going there, but if you're looking around for value pitchers, or if you're rostering like a big spread of those guys in the high sixes to sevens, I wouldn't necessarily leave them off the list. I do think, there's more potential, worse matchup, but more talent, more potential than a Spencer Watkins. I'll say that. So he'd be on my list of SP2 value guys.
Okay.
Winkowski, not so much.
No. Winkowski, definitely not so much. So let's look at how much you're attacking Winkowski, and then you can look at if there's any scumdacker opportunities with Dunning.
The Rangers definitely some interesting bats, particularly toward the top with Semien Seager, Lowe, and Adolis Garcia. You can throw Jonah Heim into that bucket as well. Another catcher, only 3,500. He's drawing more ownership than the other catchers I've brought up, but it's totally warranted. A 40.7% hard hit rate, 13 home runs, and 388 plate appearances. So 1 through 5, they're totally rosterable there. And then you get into Leody Taveras, Cole Calhoun, Ezekiel Duran, Bubba Thompson. All 4 of those hitters are pretty interesting. Those guys could potentially hit higher in a lineup and probably will one day for some of the younger types. So I think 1 through 9, they're pretty rosterable. And you start offsetting a lot of cost and a lot of popularity toward the bottom there. 2,300, 2,200, 2,500, and 2,000 dead minimum. Everybody 11.8% owned or below. So I think if you want to offset some of the popularity on Semien and Seager, it's easy enough to do by just looking at some of those hitters from the bottom of the lineup.
All right. And I guess on the other side here, getting to Dunning, how much do you anticipate? He's 2.8% we have projected, right? So I guess looking at how much you're getting to him from your anticipated ownership combined with I guess that would also allow us to get a better idea of how much you're stacking the other side, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're getting him a ton, then you may not be getting to Boston as much.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be getting to him a ton. I mean, we're talking about he's 2.4% owned. If I was going that approach where I was looking at a lot of expensive pitchers, and that's the other thing, there's not a lot of premium, really expensive SP1s where you need all that savings. We've also talked about a bunch of minimum priced hitters already. So I'm not sure you even need to go to that level, but it would depend on how much I was looking for value in general. But he'd be one of my preferred targets there. And if I ended up, at 8% with the field at 2 or 3, I'd be good with that. 10%, anything beyond 10, I think maybe would be pushing it, but somewhere around there. I think he's worth taking some shots with the Red Sox, but I think maybe the top end is a little too popular for my tastes because he's typically pretty good keeping the ball in the yard, keeping it on the ground. 2.57% home run rate, a 5-degree average launch angle this season. Not the easiest guy in the world to hit the ball out of the park against. There are some terrific home run hitters, and the Red Sox are definitely worth getting to some shares, but 20% on Rafi Devers, over 10 into the mid-teens on Pham, Verdugo, Bogarts. I don't love the spot. Trevor Story may be a little interesting, below 10%. And then their big prospect first baseman, Tristan Casas, in the lineup at dead minimum 2,000, another minimum price hitter. He's hitting 6th today. That's an interesting spot. He's a power hitter and kid with a lot of pedigree. So I maybe be looking more toward the, the middle, or maybe if you're just like skipping Devers, not that you want to typically skip the best hitter in the lineup, but everybody else is a lot cheaper and a lot less expensive. So, and therefore easier to put together. But obviously Rafi Devers is a superstar.
Any updates real quick? I did see the chat asked that specifically Colin Richardson. So I know that we all play meteorologists on our regular jobs here, including you out there. Benny Levine has his own Doppler running. I know all of that's what I mean. I said it before Benny even before he even hit the enter button. I knew somebody was coming. And look, to be honest with you, I trust your Doppler out there than all the other Dopplers we get with the local weather anyway. So does anybody have any updates worth noting? You first, Terry McBride.
I haven't seen anything of concern in terms of the Atlanta game, which is the one that starts first and the one that, I was saying probably going to start clean, but then rain later. Looks like about 4:00 the rain starts. So they're going to have 2 hours and change to get it in. Hopefully they pitch fairly efficiently through there. The other spot was Cleveland. Let's see here.
Yep. By the way, good time
note from Alex in the Discord. Another great reason to subscribe at the site and make sure that you're in the premium Discord, because guys like Alex jump in and drop notes or things that they notice that are important. Alex says, make sure to uncheck the Colorado-Cincinnati game if you're using Fantasy Cruncher. It is not automatically excluded. So make sure you're doing that, or you're going to book some zeros in your lineups, guys. Yep. Cleveland looks dicey. The window of no rain has shrunk. Ooh. So yeah. 2:00 on, it is just looks like full rain. The radar looks cleaner than what the little bar showing where the rain is going to be does. I don't know what that means. But yeah, dicey.
Well, here's the thing. That's the last game on our slate. We have about another, 30, 35 or so before lock.
Yeah, you'll have a little time to changes there.
Absolutely. And I think that actually works in our favor that that's the last game. Like if this were the next game, I'd even say, hey, let's just move it to the end, because it gives us more time for this thing to breathe. And you may full on know in the next 30 minutes if you're going to be dealing. You said after 2:00, it's a 2:40 Eastern start. So you may not even get this game at all.
Yeah, that gets tricky. I'm just trying to jump back over to the page with the start times on it. The other thing that gets tricky is if you're building and you're saying, all right, I'm going to leave that in because I'll have time to make some swaps from it. Then you're going to be limiting yourself. That's the last game of the day at 2:40, but the other two games that start in the 2:00 hour at 2:10 and 2:15 with the Twins, White Sox, Cubs, and Cards. So you're playing with fire a little bit in terms of your just ability to be able to swap guys out. You're going to have some positional equivalencies in mind. You're going to have some salary equivalencies in mind if you're going to that game. Yeah, I'm not wild about that spot right now. I do like George Kirby in terms of a pitcher in a vacuum, but I wasn't really going there against the Guardians anyway. So I think at this point, I would be pretty comfortable just crossing off pitching at the very least from that game with Kirby.
Low total too. So, I mean, factor that in, especially if it gets wet. Maybe it changes. By the way, Hango A, not even just because he nailed the location for all of you who are not familiar with the Philadelphia or Northeast area, Cotman Ave is a known spot, but West Coast Video or Blockbuster? You got to go West Coast Video, right?
I have to, because I've got an old West Coast Video employee shirt in the other room over there.
Well, I didn't know you worked there.
I worked at a West Coast Video. We were an independent national video, which was like a much smaller chain. And then we got bought by West Coast, or he bought into the franchise, I guess, at a certain point. And then we were West Coast for the last couple of years.
Couldn't you get porn at West Coast, but not at Blockbuster?
We did have porn.
Yeah, no porn at Blockbuster. I know
correct.
that.
Yeah, Blockbuster was all big and corporate and didn't have the adult movies. I think I've told this story on shows before, but I'll be quick about it.
Please.
It was always awkward because the way we had the porn set up, you see, if you've ever been to an old video store, a lot of them had like the room behind the curtain.
Sure.
Like, a bunch of dads surreptitiously going in there, and you'd be like, "What's in that room?" But the way we did it, my boss would, he had a huge binder, and he would go and he would order the porn tapes. That would come in. He would take the covers out of them, and he would put the sleeves of the covers into the binder, like a big binder full of baseball cards, basically. And that was on a shelf. So you could sit there, you could look through, these guys would come in and they'd be sitting there looking through the binder, finding the cover that they liked. And then the cover corresponds to a number, and there's just blank tapes with numbers on them in cases. Down below that, you pull the number, the correct, the corresponding number, bring it up to the counter. The weird thing was, our counter where we worked was here, directly facing where the porn tapes were. And the porn tape guys would be facing this way, looking directly at us over the top of the candy rack. So it was our station facing out that way, candy racks where all the kids would go. And then on the other side of the candy, the porn facing back this way. So not only were the kids and the candy, the kids and the porn guys all grouped in one spot, the porn guys, while they're sitting there, sometimes for way too long, looking through these covers, would be just staring right back at you. And there's no place else to look. Yep. They're just like, anytime they look away from the book, it's just like eye contact. Hey, how you doing?
That's amazing. I can't believe I've never heard that story before, but I believe every single second of that, by all means. All right. Oh, yeah. By the way, Zagnuts just blew a gasket. You going through that story there. I love it. All right. That's crazy, by the way, where you're just looking. That opens up a completely different conversation. To Tampa Bay. We go. Now, let's get the obvious out of the way here. I think Frankie Montas is projected super high, and Tampa Bay is the lowest projected stack, Terry McBride, on the entire slate. So let's just get that out right away. As Montas is not even the highest projected pitcher. You've got Giolito. We already talked about Max Fried. But on the other side, I mean, this is basically Alex's projections telling you don't touch Tampa and load up on Montas.
Yeah. I mean, Montas has definitely struggled since coming to the Yankees, but overall, there's plenty of track record for him being a very good pitcher. On the whole, this season, 23.8% strikeout rate, a 3.45 xFIP, 3.94 ERA, inducing 12% swinging strikes. Hasn't been egregiously bad with the home run rate. 3.14 is fine. 35.5% hard hit, limited barrels. So overall, yeah, it's a fine spot for Frankie Montas. I'm at the point where I don't totally trust him. He was never on that list of guys that I was always just, gonna roster shares of no matter what. He was always a tick down from some of those guys, in my opinion, in terms of being an ace. Maybe some of that's just general bias from like he was a PED user, and I don't know how much of that his ace caliber seasons came from that. But again, very good pitcher in a decent matchup here against the Rays. Weak version of the Rays with Yandy Diaz, G-Man, Manny Margot, Randy Rosarena is fine, David Peralta, Isaac Paredes, Christian Bethancourt. It's a lineup he can easily get through, decent pitchers park. So I definitely see the upside in Frankie Montas. 38% is pushing it though. The price is right at 8,400 for that popularity. I get why he's that popular. I think I'd be under the field and spreading it around to some other spots. That said, we did lose George Kirby. So maybe it's justifiable 38% on the DK slate. The price is definitely good at 8,400 in this matchup. That's a good price for Frankie Montas. So you're not making a mistake, maybe a little bias trickling in on my part. And yeah, I wouldn't want to tangle too much with the Rays, maybe a few shares if you're rostering a lot of Montas.
The difference that you're going to get in leverage clearly is how less of an owned commodity Lucas Giolito is, right? We'll talk about him a little bit more in depth here coming up on the slate, but you're paying up for Carrasco. You mentioned how there's some trouble or at least some concern there. I'm with you. Other guys in this range of 8,400, Mikolas, probably not. You talked about Lopez. you're only saving really 200. It's probably not even worth it at that point. So the only other true, and maybe I missed something, but the only other true parallel, especially with Kirby out here, would be Giolito. And again, the $200 difference I'm not worried about. You are, though, gaining about 20% ownership to the field by hitting Giolito. So maybe it's the matchup against Minnesota, or maybe it's those numbers, or maybe it's something that just would say take Montas even over all of that against Giolito.
Yeah, I mean, Giolito's kind of the guy I had in mind when I was talking about that. Just getting Giolito at half the ownership, and I know he hasn't been elite level Giolito, but that's also why he costs 8,600 against this Twins lineup. He'd be the spot I'm more excited about. I would pivot shares from Frankie Montas to Lucas Giolito specifically because of that ownership situation. I have nothing but faith in Lucas Giolito, and overall, yeah, he's got a 5.27 ERA. He's got a 3.65 xFIP. You know what his xFIP was last year when everybody loved him and would flock to him in this spot? 3.75. So he's actually, in that regard, been a little bit better than last year. His strikeout rate's down a little bit. His swinging strikes down about 3 percentage points. That's concerning. The whip is up. There's some batting average on balls in play. There's a little bit more walks, but I still trust Lucas Giolito. He's going to get this figured out. So that ownership mark is too low for him at that price. So yeah, that's my preferred spot between the two. But like I said, I don't think anybody's making a mistake if they A, prefer the Montas side, or B, just roster the Montas side alongside the field. And you can do that while also still getting over on Lucas Giolito shares. It's not impossible. So I think it's a reasonable spot.
So nothing really at all with Tampa, right? No Yarbrough and no bats here. We'll just move on.
Yeah, I don't really see the need to go to the Tampa bats. It's not a spot where, you know, as much as the Yanks have struggled, there's still some deadly, dangerous hitters in that lineup, and you don't love the tango with them. Pitchers Park, yeah, but yeah, I'm not seeing it.
Okay. All right, let's move to the Mets game here. Interesting total, 8.5. Washington sneaky early. Saw that again in the first, maybe. So there's an opportunity, I think, and you alluded to this at the opening of the slate here. There might be an opportunity to just, I hate to use the term get to Carrasco, but maybe to the point where it's not as hard of a smash as maybe the numbers would indicate, especially where he's projected as the fourth highest pitcher. And 9,100, like we should also mention, he's at 9,100. So that's a serious tag. I get it. Like Washington is a 20 plus 250, pardon me, dog here on the road. So it's not like there's an expectation Washington's going to come in and smash, but I think it does speak to your concern earlier at the start of the slate.
Yeah, my one concern here is how much depth we're getting from Carrasco. He's just coming back from an oblique injury that he suffered about 3 weeks ago. It was, I think, the 15th that he came out of his start. He made no rehab starts. He threw a sim game. He threw a bullpen session, and that's it. We don't have any confirmation that I've seen of, hey, he's on X for his pitch count. Hey, he's only getting 4 innings, 5 innings. He projects extremely well for me. Like my model matches what we've got him on the site, maybe even exceeds it a little bit. But when I cut into the innings, it does have an impact. If I'm only getting 4 innings, I don't think he's necessarily playable at 9,100. If I'm getting 5, he's borderline playable. So it's really down to how much faith you have in the Mets letting him pitch. Also keeping in mind that they maybe just dropped Max Scherzer from the rotation for a little bit. He came out of last night's game. So I think there's some concern for the Mets to be treating Carrasco with some kid gloves here and giving him, 4 or 5 innings. You're rolling the dice, but it is a short enough pitching slate that it's probably warranted to do a little bit. I just don't know that I would want to invest like 18-20% like the field looks like they're doing. He was at 1.6% ownership on the FanDuel slate. I think that was a much easier number to exceed. If I was playing that FanDuel slate and I was able to get to like 10%, I'd be fine with rolling those dice. I don't know that I want to roll the dice with 20% of my lineups.
Is he enough? Like, is he? Probably not, right? Somebody that you would jam in as a high cost P2 behind, and we'll assume that Seattle-Cleveland game is going. So if you had Kirby and Fried as 2 of the higher options, is it even worth, with that concern and that risk, having a second P2 like that at 9,100 against Washington? Whereas maybe if you're looking at that and then a smart second option, even if you're saving $700 by going to Montas as your second pitcher there, it seems like Carrasco is your P2 at 91 with guys more expensive in Kirby or Fried, to your point, may not be a smart investment.
Yeah, see, that's where I'm just going to take those shares and I'm going to move right to Lucas Giolito, under-owned Luke Giolito, rather than taking the shot on Frankie Montas, because then you're just going way up in ownership. And I don't like the idea of doing that with that also expensive SP2 spot. If you're going to make that play, I'd rather have that guy be a little bit less owned, a little bit contrarian, because you're going to be walking into, if you're spending all that money on pitcher, you're walking into a few very specific spots in terms of where you can stack bats. So you don't want to be exactly the same approach as everybody else out there is doing it. So I think that's a spot where it would be, fundamentally important to make a pivot away from the ownership if you're deciding to go away from Carrasco. So if I was ranking those, I would probably say Giolito, Carrasco, then Montas, despite the concerns with Carrasco's potential innings limit, but I would limit the exposure to him because of that, if that makes sense.
I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely. It makes perfect sense. And I'm glad you explained it that way, because anybody looking at the number may think otherwise, not opposite, but just otherwise. Real quick, Jason, is the Reds Rockies game on the DK slate? Chat has been answering, but just for those who are watching and maybe not interacting on the chat, Terry broke this down earlier. Essentially, we have that doubleheader. The first leg was in this slate, but since it was bumped up, it was removed from this slate. Now, FanDuel didn't give you that opportunity. DraftKings did. So that's why we have Alex and others in our Discord and here on the chat.
Yeah, the guys are still in the pool. They can be selected, but you will score a 0 for everybody in your roster. So
don't. And it looks like, and I saw this on the radar here, that
I always drink coffee.
Macman BD getting more concerned about the Atlanta game, looking at the radar. So the two games that are bookending this slate, essentially the Atlanta and Cleveland game, are in major concern right now. Peril, dare I say.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that changed too.
Right?
It looks like they had a few more pop-ups around Atlanta just on the radar. That block of open time that we had until 4:00 is now just rain
evaporated,
half hour all day long.
Oh,
that's concerning.
What's the vector of that weather, Victor?
Tuesday too. Bad weather. For
no airplane lines here. You're going to confuse us. Is that airplane or airplane 2?
Which line? The coffee line?
What's the vector of that weather, Victor?
Oh, I just see it.
Roger. Let's anything on Washington from the standpoint. I mean, Eric Fetty is pretty much a super low cost. I'm screwed. I've mismanaged my money, and I have to jam somebody at 5,700 in the Nats bats. I don't know if you're doing anything there. Again, Carrasco does have 16.1% projected ownership, so you're not even decimating a bunch of the field here if he got sneaky on Washington. Doesn't mean that there's nothing there. I just don't know how much of a risk there is there.
Yeah, just not a team I like going to. Not a lot of great bats in that lineup. If you were going there, maybe some Lane Thomas, Joey Menzies, Luke Voit, Keibert Ruiz kind of a stack. Don't get the struggling Nelson Cruz in the lineup today. Not a stack for me. And Carrasco, very talented pitcher in his 126 and a third this year, 23.4% strikeouts, a 3.50 xFIP. Just not a guy I love to tangle with a bad lineup. So I don't really see the need to go there. If you're hunting around for value and super low ownership, maybe some of those guys that I named. You're getting, even if you get 4 or 5 innings of the starter, you're still getting a decent Mets bullpen with some talented arms in it. It's just not a ton of upside on the Nats side of things. The Mets probably more interesting here going up against Fede. I don't think I would have shares of Fede. Again, he's another, below league average type pitcher, but he's 5,700. So you can take some shots if you need that salary savings. Like you said, if you've totally mismanaged your lineup and you're stuck and you only have 57 to spend, I guess he's on the board there. He projects out okay in terms of that, but he doesn't challenge for like the top of the board. He doesn't challenge for an upside start here. I would prefer to take the Mets bat side of things. They're a little bit popular, but like a guy like Dan Vogelbach hitting 5th, 4,100, 6.8% owns. Sign me up for some Dan Vogelbach here against a weak righty. Even if he gets pinch hit for late in the game, you could pick off some nice home run upside on him early and not have to sweat it.
So what you brought up about Fetty, I think, begs the question here, and we can transition to our next game with this. If you have totally mismanaged your money and you're sitting with 5,900 to spend on one final pitcher, is it Max Castillo or is it Eric Fetty?
Oh boy. Let me look at Castillo.
You don't have much.
I'd be concerned again about innings with Castillo. In his starts, he went, I think, like 3 and change, 4 and 5, but he hasn't cracked, I think, 70 pitches in his 3 starts. Everything else has been relief. So some of the strikeout rate is decent strikeout rate, 23%, definitely better than what Fede's doing, a 3.41 xFIP, a 0.94 whip. Some of that you have to keep in mind is bullpen numbers. So some of that we have to deal with, and guys can pitch with higher effort, and it's just a different animal pitching out of the pen. It's a fantastic matchup for Castillo here. He's cheap. I do think there's some upside there. If you get 5 innings, you could get a handful of strikeouts out of him and pay off that price pretty nicely. So I think he's definitely on the board. I'm not sure how much more enthusiastic I'd be than Fede. Definitely a better, actually, no, let me unwind that. It's definitely a better matchup. He's probably only going to go 3 or 4. That's the concern. You also are tangling with a kid who's got a 43.7% hard hit rate, a 12.7% barrel rate, and a 5% home run rate in his 25 2/3. So there are some reasonable concerns about even a bad team like the Tigers being able to get to Castillo. But I do think he's at least on the board with those other guys in that price tier.
So this is a little bit of a switch here, because you talked about Dunning and getting to him at that 7,000 range, also with something behind it, right? Not just the lowest projected pitcher that you're just trying to rationalize something outside of it. I would imagine that even though you're spending another $300 here, which should be more inconsequential than not, Matt Manning now becomes a really interesting option because of leverage that you're gaining to the field, and looking at him projected pretty much where we have Pablo Lopez and even above George Kirby.
Yeah, it's a weird day when we're talking about Matt Manning being viable, but 7,300 on the
that
DK
cost,
slate.
right?
Yeah, and it's somewhat justifiable. He's only 11% popular despite a $7,300 price tag in a decent matchup here. The Royals are pretty gettable for strikeouts at this point. The starting lineup has an average strikeout rate of 25% overall in this season. So definitely plenty of strikeouts in that lineup for him. He's striking out guys at a 19% clip over 40 1/3, 4.18 xFIP, a 2.98% home run rate. He's been very good limiting hard hit, 31.7% hard hit. There might be just enough on the bone there for Matt Manning where you can push him up a little bit. And if you're getting, I don't want to say double the field necessarily, because that's, now we're talking about like 22-25% of your pitching slots, but I think it's probably warranted to get a little beyond the field on him anyway, or at least roster him around that level as one of your value guys.
Now, what are you doing with these bats, if anything, here? Because I mean, you start to look at where we have things projected on site, Alex, and you mentioned you're concerned about Castillo's depth in this game. It doesn't really look to boost Detroit, although they are kind of in the middle of the pack. So again, you do have the Miami and Tampa. We'll talk a little bit about Chicago. We mentioned briefly with what's happening here with Washington. The cost of the Yankees is going to keep them down. I get it. But Detroit might be somewhat viable, maybe as a substack. You're going to spend nothing on them.
Right. I think so. As a value stack, that's, somewhat, they're getting tiny little droplets of popularity around like Riley Green, Victor Reyes, Javi Baez, but we're talking about under 10% for all those guys. They're the most popular names at the top. You get a cleanup hitter that's the dead minimum, and Harold Castro is a lefty going up against this kid. Eric Haas has power for days against anybody. So I do think there are some interesting bats there. It's a terrible baseball team. It's not somebody I'd be excited to roster. There are only 2 hitters in the entire lineup with more than 10 home runs. That's Javi Baez and Heinrich Candelario, who each have 12. This is a bad baseball team, but it's a decent enough spot. I mentioned the hard hit. I mentioned the home run rate that Castillo's allowed so far. Very small sample. We got to keep that in mind. But, again, some of it bullpen, some of it starting. I think there's enough upside here where not a lot of ownership, very easy prices to get to. You can grab some Tigers. Don't run away with it. Don't get too carried away. But yeah, in small doses, I think there's a little bit of value there.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. Oh, no, Royals bats, which you might even get a little bit more here as far as where they're projected. And the leverage, I think, is minuscule as far as what you're losing to the field. It's more just about taking advantage of their popularity right now until they become even more popular. And to be fair, they are one of the, not most, but more popular stacks.
Yeah, some of that is coming from Bobby Witt at like 15%. Everybody else in the upper single digits to around 10%, but they're playable for sure. MJ Melendez in the lineup, Bobby Witt, Sal Perez, Nick Pratto. I like that as a 4-man just off the top of the lineup there. And then Michael Taylor is serviceable, I guess. Mike Massey, Hunter Dozier. It's not the most exciting back end of the lineup. Definitely some lower on low cost guys down there. Massey's somewhat interesting. 42.9% hard hit, 15.7% barrels. Only one home run out of that in 105 plate appearances, but slashing 283, 356, 402, creating runs 17% better than average as a second baseman. So I could get to some shares of him. I would prefer him to like Nicky Lopez, the 9 hitter, even though he's 300 more expensive and a little bit more popular. Just a better lineup spot, better hitter. But yeah, at least like 1 through 6, 1 through 7, you can get to some Royals.
All right. So you mentioned Giolito here, and look, we're winding down. 3 more games. If you haven't already, hit the thumbs up button, please. And again, make sure you're subscribed here to what we have going on, the Odd Shopper channel as well. What's happening with our football season-long fantasy. I mean, we just exploding right now, Terry, ahead of the fall. So we want everybody, not just here, but across the board, part of this greater community, the Discord. I saw Larry hitting Jared up in the chat about the Discord, and constant questions that you may have that may not get answered here would be answered in the Discord. You're always active everywhere. So you can't get enough Terry. I know that.
Boy, that's not a popular saying anywhere in the world, maybe except for this channel.
But
yeah, appreciate all the love, gang. Appreciate everybody who comes and hangs out with us. And the community is just great. I mean, people who are in the chat and YouTube, they get half of it because they're not in the Discord. Jump over to the Discord, guys. It's a lot of conversation going on, basically, 24/7, sports related and otherwise. We were talking about video games in there yesterday after the slate locked. I was looking for a new good RPG to play. So, I mean, you can get all kinds of advice, life advice.
Did you get an answer?
Yeah, I got a bunch of good suggestions. So
there's not a new
going to
Fallout
start The Witcher
yet,
3
right?
just because I already own it. It's just been sitting on my shelf, and it's supposedly one of the best of all time. So probably going to start that. I'm waiting on Elden Ring until I get a PS5.
What was the first one that I talked over?
Yeah, The Witcher 3.
Yeah, that's all time.
Yeah,
I would put that up there. I mean,
one.
I've stopped. I've beaten it and gone back and played like a bunch of side stuff. Paused, gone back, played a bunch of side stuff. Like that's
where I'm at in Red Dead at this point. I beat Red Dead over the pandemic, and then I just keep going back to it because there's so much to do and explore.
There's a lot of little stuff there. Yeah,
but I'm looking for a new start over kind of experience in a big open world.
I thought Fallout 4 was disappointing, and then the online one. I'm not a huge MMO, so I want like a new Fallout in a new like specific. Vegas was the last one that I was just sit there and play forever. All right,
that's a great game.
Yeah, Lucas Giolito, man. We've talked about him. You've talked about him. Now's your opportunity to remind the world why he's one of the best players on the slate.
Yeah, he's just going under owned for being Lucas Giolito at 8,600. He's only 16.8% owned, going up against the Twins team that we just saw his teammate come within an out of a perfect game against last night. And Lucas Giolito is every bit the pitcher that Dylan Cease is. So a repeat performance out of that, maybe not be exactly what we get here, but I expect a decent start from Lucas Giolito. Again, I know he struggled. I know he's got a 5.27 ERA. I care a lot more about XFIP than I do ERA, and his XFIP is 3.65. It's a lot better than his ERA. He's been unlucky. There's some BABIP involved here. He's definitely walking too many guys. It's an 8.6% walk rate, up from 7.2% last year. I mentioned the strikeouts have dipped 27.9 down to 25.5. That's not totally egregious. The more concerning factor is the swinging strikes, 15.3% last year, 12% this year. 12% still a very good number, but that dip is a little bit concerning. So there are real things that he's got to address and got to deal with. But like I said before, I just have full confidence in his ability to get there and to get it back to where it was, because for one, it's not that far off of where it was. So in this spot, in this start, at price, at ownership, I think it's a spectacular spot. I would enthusiastically go to Lucas Giolito as a pivot away from some of these more popular pitchers. Interesting opportunity here to scum Dacker the Minnesota bats, though, right? Yeah, you can definitely do that. For as talented as he is and all the virtues that he's got, he has given up too many runs this year. He has put too many guys on base this year. They're a team that, they're missing their superstar in Byron Buxton, but they've got the guy who broke up the no-hitter last night, Luis Arias, a 7% strikeout rate. He's just such a good hitter, and not a good fantasy option necessarily, not a good power hitter by any means, but a good bat on ball guy. So he could just screw up a guy like Luke Giolito's day just by being who he is, leading into Carlos Correa, Jose Miranda, Max Kepler, Gio Urshela, those type guys. I don't love the back half of this lineup, but I wouldn't tell anybody they were making a mistake by grabbing shares, especially if they're loading up on Giolito. If you go to, double the field 30-ish% on Giolito and you had 10% or not 10%, but you had like 10 lineups with twin stacks in other pitchers, I wouldn't necessarily think you're making a mistake.
Jorge on the super chat. Appreciate you, Jorge. Big time, as always. Thank you. Definitely not necessary, but always appreciated here. Would you suggest, because the weather would you suggest the weather to decrease Fry? I think that's what it is.
Decrease Max Fried shares.
Yeah, to decrease the exposure. I was trying to work through that. And then also St. Louis is a main stack, and we'll talk about them actually as our next game. So Fried, if you look at that, the weather to decrease your exposure, and that's a good question to ask, especially as the weather has turned for the worst out there. So that impacting or maybe decreasing your exposure to Fried. And then on top of that, looking at St. Louis as your top stack or a main stack, especially countering the field, not getting to them.
Yeah, that I would honestly probably be looking to pull shares from Max Fried. You can still roll the dice until you get an official PPD or something in that game. But it's dicey. It's also a division game. It's Atlanta and Miami. It's easy enough to just reschedule this game on an open day. I'm not sure how many common open days they have left the rest of the year, but you would think that there's going to be one. They might even be playing each other again in Atlanta at some point in September. So I would be a little bit concerned, and those concerns go double for the pitchers. You see the pitchers, you see rain and delays and things like that, start stops impact pitching a lot more than hitting. So the point of concern would definitely be on the two pitchers there. And I would probably, unless somebody like Alex is saying otherwise, I would probably be considering moving away from some of that. Not sure where Alex has the probability of postponement in our numbers right now. And then on the St. Louis question against Marcus Strowman, it doesn't pop like it did against the lefty yesterday, but they're always on my list and they're very low owned. So St. Louis bats I can get enthusiastic about. At the very least, Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, Tyler O'Neill, Nolan Gorman, that portion of the lineup. And then you've got pieces like Tommy Edman, like Corey Dickerson hitting fifth as a lefty, Newport leadoff, Donovan leadoff, both lefties against Strowman here. It's a lineup you can roster pretty much top to bottom, but I wouldn't get as carried away with it as I did yesterday, where they were just looking spectacular against the lefty. They look good, not great today. Yeah,
so that opens up, I guess, more with St. Louis, right? Where you look at their ownership, 2.4%. We have projected on the last run here on this slate.
That's the more appealing thing than the matchup is just, where some of those guys are priced and how low owned they are. Like Paul Goldschmidt at 2%. I don't care that he's 6,400. We'll figure out a way to pay for that. We've already talked about a bunch of reasonably priced pitchers. Arenado, 6,300, same story, 1% ownership. Tyler O'Neill has been on fire lately, 5,500, 1% ownership. So three of my favorite bats, and then all the other guys are cheap and easy to get to. It's very easy to string this team together. So I would give the Cards a nice little nudge there.
Mikolas 8,800, Strowman 7,900. Just based on where St. Louis is projected, it opens up a good conversation, I think, for a guy in Strowman who has a double-digit percentage as far as being in the top two. Yes, it's at 10, but still, we'll see what happens with Seattle and Cleveland before we get out of here. But at least there's an opportunity at 7,900 for a lower cost P2. And then Mikolas is sitting at 8,800. We've talked about Montas, Giolito. So there are Lopez. There are a couple of guys who are a little bit cheaper in that 8K range. But what are you doing, especially with St. Louis and that stack in the backdrop is how you just laid it out, Terry? What are you doing with these pitchers?
Yeah, Strowman's on that board for value, guys. St. Louis is very good, but like I've mentioned, they're better against lefties. They're still 15% better than average creating runs, which is fifth in baseball against righties, and they don't strike out that much. Strowman is typically a better real-life pitcher, guy who can limit runs, limit power, limit upside, but not necessarily go out and post a monster DFS start. 20.1% strikeout rate, over 101 2/3 this year, 3.55 xFIP. Doesn't allow, like I said, a lot of power, but he does allow some hard hit, 45.6% hard hit rate, only a 7.1 degree average launch angle and a 6.8% barrel rate, which is what saves him from giving up a ton of power. But there are some tremendous power hitters on the other side. At 7,900, 3.4% ownership, he should probably be owned double, triple that by the field. He should probably be out around like 10% at this price, particularly as we're shortening this pitching slate. And he might get to that level, but he's in the bag with the other value guys. He'd definitely be worth some shares. You do see from time to time those weird Strowman starts where he finds a few additional strikeouts and all of a sudden he's got value because he's probably going to go reasonably deep into the game and pitch fairly well. And then Mikolas on the other side, I definitely think is on the board, but it's an uncomfortable price for Miles Mikolas, but great matchup against the Cubbies. They've been dominated all season long. They've been bad against righties. Projects out nicely for me. The FanDuel price at 10K was much more concerning, but he was only 4.4% owned over there. If you're making pivots trying to get away from Max Fried ownership on FanDuel, who was 3,000 more, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to just move at least a handful of those over to Miles Mikolas and get over the field on him. Projects nicely for me. 8,800 is a nice discount price on DK, pushing 30% ownership. Probably about right. It's probably about where I'd want to be.
Any concern about, and just in general with the Cubs bats, but looking at this thing, it's a 7.5 run total here. So even if they get to that, I think the expectation is that St. Louis is going to be doing more of the heavy lifting. So I don't know what that does with Chicago. We still have that one game in Cleveland we'll end with and trying to figure out if there's any change in weather there, but anything that you could do or budge with the Cubs?
Not really.
Not.
I'm not seeing a ton of it. Mikolas doesn't typically get completely lit. Same with Strowman on the other side. That's why you see a kind of lowish run total in this one. Definitely would prefer the Cards bats side of that equation. If you're going to Cubbies, it's say Suzuki, Franmil Reyes, Ian Happ, maybe some Chris Morel if you need like a wraparound. That's basically the long and short of it. Grab the power bats and
all right. Sounds good. Sounds good. Now let's assume this game is a go here. George Kirby was definitely a name that popped up throughout, especially as a reference, assuming the game is a go. Cal Quantrill, on the other hand, though, low owned, some opportunity if you were to go over that or at that 2.9%, but just doesn't look like 1.5, pardon me, on the update. So doesn't look like he was getting a ton. It's really just a matter of how much leverage you think you can get with Quantrill, who actually has a ton of leverage working in his favor because nobody's getting to him with a high projection. Kirby also has that same thing going for him. So both of these guys, weather aside, like if this were a dry game, weather aside, would be really strong options at 99, 96, Kirby, Quantrill, respectively.
Yeah, the Kirby side would be where I'd be going. Despite the Guardians' propensity for not striking out, I just think he's the more talented of these two pitchers. 3.26 xFIP on the season, 24.9% strikeout rate, over 102 and 2/3. He's been good this year. Quantrill on the other side, 149 innings, 25 starts, only a 16% strikeout rate, a 4.49 xFIP. He's been serviceable. The ERA is better than the xFIP. The contact numbers are okay. The home run is 2.78% home run rate. Like there are signs of progression here, maybe in some ways. Well, not really, actually. I'm just looking at last year's numbers. He was slightly better last year and still in that like mediocre bucket. So yeah, he's basically the same guy that he was last year. I think 96 is probably a little too expensive for my taste for Cal Quantrill there, but I get it. I mean, only 1.3% owned. If you wanted to go there as a weird pivot, it would make some sense because he's not getting any attention. The Mariners are a good enough lineup that I don't love tangling with them though. So I'd probably book the talent more than the Quantrill side of things.
Okay. Makes sense. Makes sense. Anything else we need to get out of here?
If you're looking at bats, if this game does play, you can roster bats on both sides of this one. With the Guardians' ability to put the ball in play, hit for some power from time to time. Certainly Jose Ramirez in there is an easy name. He's at 10%. Everybody else is like 2% or below. So it's easy enough to stack them. Don't totally love stacking against Kirby because, like I said, he's a good pitcher. I think the Mariners on the other side may be a little bit more interesting to stack against Quantrill. But again, we're dealing with a lot of weather and a lot of question marks in this game. If you're going there, Julio Rodriguez off the top, Jesse Winker, Ty France, Haniger, Eugenio Suarez. The bottom end is meh. Taylor Trammell back in the lineup hitting 9th at 2,400, maybe a little bit interesting. Yeah, you can roster them 1 through 9. It just gets a little bit weaker with the Frazier, Crawford, Casale, Trammell part of the lineup.
Awesome, brother. Always a pleasure. Always insightful. Always entertaining. Never know where we're going to take this thing.
Covered a lot of ground today. We're talking about rain in Cleveland, and we're talking about porn VHS
West Coast video
in 1997.
Where does Hollywood video rank on this?
I mean, for one, they were
poor man's.
They were like the also ran, right? Like there was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't a big Hollywood video guy.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate everybody hanging with us. Absolutely, 100%. Any dingers you have on the way out? You got a minute.
Yeah, we can jump over to the home run board. Let me just sort it real quick as I'm talking here. Looks like somebody
people can hit the thumbs up and
we had
do all that other stuff.
Yesterday's guy at the very top was Anthony Santander, and he came through. Today's is Aaron Judge. We didn't really talk about the Yankees, but Judgy and Stanton at least showing top 2 spots in the power index. Not wildly surprising to anybody. We lost the Colorado game. Then we get to Mr. Pete Alonso. And then Jose Ramirez, who I was just talking about from the Cleveland game. Seth Brown sitting there as an oddball name from Oakland, if you like him, in the looks like about the 10 spot, and Dermis Garcia also right there. So some oddball Oakland bats. We talked about them potentially being a source of one-offs earlier.
Love it. Absolutely love it. All right. Thanks to Jordan, as always, for producing, for the beats, for everything. And thanks to you out there. Thumbs up, subscribe. There we go.
There's the
part of what's happening here. The Stokastic community, the Odd Shopper community, the fantasy football community, everything that's happening here. We are blowing up everything, exploding with content this fall. So being part of it, appreciate you. Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, buddy.